Oh man, it's springtime outside, and springtime, and every time I ride my bike down to campus, essential personnel to take care of mosquitoes, there's all sorts of sounds. Sounds of spring, lots of animal vocalizations, lots of animal movements, and of course it makes me think of sociality, social behavior, and especially it makes me think of a very prominent and impressive form of social behavior called territoriality. So today we are going to kind of construct a very basic kind of scaffold for what territorial behavior is. It's super exciting. A lot of you that are in the business of dealing with canids, for instance, you're a dog person, either as a pet owner or even more elaborate. You're a dog trainer, or you work in a pet store, or you're going to go into a zoo. Territoriality defines canids. You think about that. You know so much about territoriality already just because of your basic curiosity and experience with animals. So let's now get some structure to it. So I think that the first thing then is to get it on the board. We're going to actually just kind of define some things. So first off, what is a territory? A territory is any defended area. It's any defended area, and I think what we should say is that it is the protected part of a home range. So there we have a couple of great concepts there. I think what we'll do is just kind of construct a basic map of what territoriality might look like, and then maybe toss around a few examples. So let's do a map here where we kind of are going to lay out, we'll consider an animal that has very localized reproductive space, a nest. So we'll draw some territories. Those are showing up okay. Here's a few territories. I'll even throw one in here at the bottom. So we've got these territories. I'm actually going to change the color for the home range. So here's a home range. Here's a home range that has overlap. Here's a home range. Here's a home range. So check these areas out. These areas here have shared or overlapping home ranges. That's not supposed to be territory there. I'm going to modify this territory a little bit. Matter of fact, I'm going to make the territories look a little bit better because they're not quite showing up. At least they're not showing up to me. That's a pretty good territory map. And then we'll throw in the middle. We'll say, okay, here is a nest site. Here's a nest site, the solid circles. I'm going to make a key for this. And then we'll go into identifying some other spots in the territory. I'm just going to put some circles here. These could be refuge sites for a particular animal. And they can be in territories. I should probably give a nest site for this territory, right there, down in the corner. Some refuges here. Okay, there we go. So let's make a key. First off, this is the territorial boundary. Okay. Territory boundary. And then let's get with that orange and do, this is the home range. Then this is nest site. And in my open circle in red is refuge site. And let's do this little area here. If you ever see this part, neutral area. Okay, I think I've got it. Yeah. So there's a nice little map of kind of Territoriality 101. You can put this on to anything. Let's think about our pikas. So there's a little clip in the middle of the pika clip. We already know that these pikas are holding territories, defending territories, male territories, female territories, and then within that territory was the cache. They of course are making big hay piles to survive the winter under the snow because they don't hibernate, and that's what maybe a talus field looks like. And this is a pika, kind of a pika habitat, and of course, seasonality-wise, there's going to be mating, so therefore a female and a male are going to get together, but still it's going to be the female raising offspring in her territory. So this is the way that this looks. And of course the pika is a great example. We could take a similar system and put it onto the coral reef. Let's go to the coral reef. Let's think of a butterfly fish. Beautiful, beautiful butterfly fish that you often see in aquaria. Here's an interesting thing for the aquarium keepers of the world. Not every fish is a good member for a tank. Certainly if you bring in more than one of a given species, because there are some species that are just definitively territorial and they'll rip each other apart. You might only have one that you can put in the aquarium. Not only that though, territoriality behavior does not necessarily have to be intraspecific. There's territoriality right now going on between foxes and coyotes, for instance. So when it comes down to it, territoriality is all about resources. That's what it's about. So, territory is about resources. All about resources, and let's consider some of the resources of territoriality. Of course, the big one that comes to mind would be food. Obviously, food's a very important resource. Matter of fact, the butterfly fish that I was just talking about, there are some species that are actually exclusively coral polyp feeders, and if you're a coral polyp feeder, that's a resource that doesn't move around. You know, those coral polyps are fixed on the substrate, and you're going to defend a territory because that's your food. Of course, other things, however, that can be considered resources for territoriality would be shelter. Matter of fact, same thing holds for the butterfly fish. So the butterfly fish is defending a food resource, but also a shelter resource. You know, lots of nooks and crannies make that fish better able to avoid predation. So we've got that. The next one, simply just space. You know, that's an important resource. And the next one, of course, and I probably should put this in a different color, is mates. Now, the reason that I've put mates in a separate color here is this could bring us into, we might see associated with mating a more kind of seasonal, not necessarily, but seasonality plays into territoriality. Hey, think about these birds that we've already been talking about. We have birds that are seasonal, and they are nesting up here in the northern hemisphere. and then they are migrating. And of course, we were looking at shorebirds just the other day, and these shorebirds are actually big foraging groups, dilution effect against predators while they are in the south. And then when they come back up here, they isolate and set up and really get into defending territories, nesting sites. So these are all resources that are going to be very important. I guess that technically speaking, food might need, H2O. Water, of course, is a resource for a great number of animals. Not only aquatic species, but terrestrial species that need water. So that's just some of many aspects. I mean, you could continue this list. For instance, maybe you're an animal that needs shade, etc., etc., etc. So all of this stuff is very, very important. Resources are therefore, it's necessary for them to be defended. Now what we want to do is kind of structure territoriality a little bit more with regards to the types of territories that we find. So that's a good board. That is okay. So let's take a look at some types of territoriality. Okay, so mating, of course, is extremely important. Those associated with mating, and here we have some examples where we have male territories for mating season. Now I want you to think of type 1 plain fin midshipman. That's a big time kind of territory holder, and definitely one that I can't throw in a little video clip of that right now, but you can definitely go back and look at that 6-minute video that shows what these guys are doing. And wow, talk about a crazy life. Remember that they're spending half or a bit more of the year way down in the aphotic zone, being predators with photophores and doing crazy things. And then they come up and they migrate up to the shallow waters that are coastal, and that's where the males set up, these type 1 males set up these big territories. Of course, remember the troubles of being a plain fin midshipman type 1 is that there are sneakers out there all the time, ready to come in and crop dust your nest and gain some fitness by fertilizing eggs that you are the one that's defending. Wow. So that is a great example of a male territory. Let's think about female territories. So sometimes it's the female that vigorously defends the territory. I think a good example of that would be nesting hummingbirds. Females are the aggressors of the nest, the defenders of the nest. Okay, so we've got that. Hold tight. Okay. Of course, we can have territories that are male-female. So we have all these different examples of mating-associated territories, and of course, that's the great thing I keep saying about the diversity of animals is we want to construct a basic scaffold because places where animals can fit, or kind of fit. There are so many different variations in behavior that we do construct scaffolds. And that kind of guides our thoughts and our organizations. And it allows us to interpret a lot of the behaviors that we encounter with animals. But at the same time, man, it's that same thing. It's that palette that we thought we were going to have all these bright colors, but then we mixed them and they became brown. It's a really cool thing. Live in the brown. It's a good place to live. Okay, so there's mating territories, but then what we want to do is identify maybe non-mating territories. So for instance, a feeding territory. So in a feeding territory, there's so many different examples of this. let's take a look primarily at that example that I mentioned before. An example of this. I think that if we looked at the pica system, we would see that the feeding is the territory. You know, they have a cache. They make a they put their food in their territory, in the middle. They defend it, so nobody else can come in and rob your cache without a fight. And then, of course, they're off and foraging in their territory. So there's several aspects to the quality of territories here. Is how much green and the right kind of green, the right kinds of plants available to pica, for instance, in a territory, or the size of the boulders of the talus field, or the rocks of the talus field, and how many really good, completely protected, spaces can they construct hay piles, or maybe even what it presents to them in the wintertime when they have all these tunnels and they're cruising around under the snow, getting to their caches so they can feed and doing what picas do underneath the snow. So a feeding territory is probably what best defines pica. Yeah, there could be some mating territoriality. They do behave differently between male and female. In other words, heterosexual borders are less vigorously defended as homosexual borders. So if you've got a territory, just above you that's male and you're a male, you're going to fight with that male a lot more aggressively than you are as a pica with the other territory that borders your property that has a female and you're a male. That's an interesting study as well. So feeding territories, the thing that I want to do is tell you that quite often these things are really kind of dynamic in both. There's so many aspects to that. Examples of animals, it's all about, it's about mating and feeding and shelter and other things would be, for instance, as I mentioned, the oval butterfly fish. So this is an animal that's feeding on coral exclusively, so it needs to have coral. It needs to defend that space. It mates here. Females and males do hook up in the territory for mating purposes, and both of them defend the territory. That is an interesting thing. And by the way, these are brutal defenses sometimes. There are not too many animals that basically commit murder within their own species, but this could be an example of one that does. Of course, humans do it all the time. Murder, by definition, I'm sorry to say, I made a mistake, is killing one of your own species, right? So oval butterfly fish would be an example. Another great example of this could be, let's see, the fiddler crab. Oh my. Fiddler crabs are amazing animals. So here they are. If you've ever seen, of course, we're basically talking beach here. We're talking tidal influences. We're talking low tide, lots of fiddler crab action, high tide not. We're seeing these little crabs, and males and females exhibit a sexual dimorphism. The males have this big, huge fiddle, right? So they have this giant kila, and they're able to use those in displays to attract females to their territory. They're also using those to lock with other males and settle territorial disputes in that way. Now, what does a fiddler crab territory have? Well, the fiddler crab, of course, is going to have, here's its territory, and there's food there. There could be mates there, but in the middle of that thing is a burrow. So for the fiddler crab, that's a burrow. And they have to dig the burrow, but once they have the burrow, that's their place. So they'll defend. They actually can chase each other, and they can chase each other pretty quickly. It's like sprint towards the other crab. So they're very constantly working on this. So they're communicating visually. They are aggressive. And by the way, what we call the behavioral term, aggression works, but the behavioral term for fighting, basically, within your species, it's called agnostic behavior. So I think that I'm going to write that over here. Agnostic behavior is basically fighting with members of your own species. Fighting, dispute. And so this is a constant game that's playing out with fiddler crabs. And of course, as I mentioned, if in the case of a male with the burrow, having won a mate with the proper signaling, he will often then just kind of leave her in that burrow to do these crabs of course have to kind of develop their offspring. Kind of like brood their offspring through maturation process, and they need that to do that. So that's not the right word. I for some reason forgot it, but that's okay. We'll look at some video footage of crabs doing their thing, and it's a neat story. So there we have kind of a structure of territory, or maybe even a lack of structure of territoriality, because we have lots of different reasons for animals to hold and defend territories. But now that we know what territories are, we can get into some of the really cool things associated with territory. So, what we want to do with territoriality is look at it through the lens of cost and benefit. Cost. So cost and gain of territoriality behavior, they're linked. So the cost is, it's going to be interesting. The cost is going to be energy. So basically, it's all about spending energy. Let me redo this. The costs would be time and energy. The benefit of this would be potentially food, mates, and etc. So we want to look at that we're looking at this through kind of the lens of optimality then, aren't we? And we can look at it through the lens of game theory, with strategy. So here is our first cool thing with territoriality. There are all sorts of hypotheses that have been proposed about animal behavior phenomena. And quite a few of these are in the realm of social behavior and territoriality. So we're going to look at one of these right now. The first one here is something called resource holding potential. And actually it's the research holding potential hypothesis. And this is the idea that, by the way, let's put an acronym for this. This is pretty commonly shown as RHP, research holding potential. And this is defined as the inherent capacity of an individual to defeat others. That's a straight glossary definition. Capacity of an individual to defeat others when competing. Of course, I have an extraordinary research holding potential. You're lucky that we're in coronavirus time, because in the spring you would have to go toe-to-toe with me. You know, like right now, I bet if we were in class, I said I can do more push-ups than anybody in the room. Research holding potential, and of course some of you'd stand up and think, yeah, and we'd hit the mat, and you'd be on the floor, and I'd still be pumping. I've got a huge resource holding potential. I'm just kidding. Oh, maybe I'm not. Who knows? We'll find out. Maybe you'll have to take a class when we actually meet back together, and then we can get our guns out and do it again. Okay, so research holding potential. You get the point. So, one of the classic research holding potentials is I've got this giant kind of lopsided, big, huge Popeye kilo, and I am a fiddler crab, and I'm in my territory, and then you're here, you're coming in, and then I'm going to signal to you with that big, huge thing, and if that big, huge thing is bigger and better than your big, huge thing, then I may be indicating to you, you don't even want to come in here, because I'm going to whoop your ass, is basically the message. Now, think of that from an energy perspective. If you can signal to an animal that could, without such a signal, just trounce on in there and result in highly costly kind of engagement of time and energy in a physical fight, well, think about that. If you can just signal, stay away from me, I'm the guy, you know? That's like the, you know, the big muscle guys on the beach, you know? Stay away from me. So, that's what happens. Research holding potential, and I guess that what I'm leading into is pretty obvious. What we're leading into is this idea that in nature, intruders give up quickly. We tend to see this. And what they call this phenomenon, if I can signal my potential to win a fight, then you give up on a potential challenge. You give up quickly because, whoa, I ain't messing with that. You're gonna whoop my ass. So in nature, the intruders give up quickly. We call this an ESS, which is called evolutionary stable strategy. Evolutionary stable strategy. Jeez. Okay. That's what an ESS is. So research holding potential is social communication that indicates that you can win a fight. Let's not even have the fight. Both of us save energy. Energy equals fitness. That's the idea. That kind of therefore underscores the whole beautiful concept of territoriality, right? I keep thinking about animals that are solitary on the end of our social spectrum. And some of these animals, of course, they tend to be top predators. They tend to have large territories. They tend to not really have to have a face-to-face fight. They're relatively rare, although they do happen. Every once in a while, game cameras will catch, nicely set game cameras that are kind of set in an area where lots of rubbing and marking and scratching and stuff goes on. You know, you never know what you get. And of course, these things are trouncing around at night, and you see foxes that intersect each other at the border of a territory, and they'll fight for a while. There's lots of urinating, there's lots of sniffing, and there's lots of chasing, and there's lots of kind of tussling and wrestling. But of course, also, these fights, when they do have to happen, are not necessarily, death fights. Fighting to the death, as I just mentioned before, is really not an evolutionary stable strategy either. It's not a good thing. So all of this has to do with indicating your resource holding potential by how much urine you put out there if you're a fox, by maybe the strength of your urine. And the idea, of course, time and time again with territoriality, is that we see that the conflicts really aren't brutal. I'm thinking of another one right now. I'm thinking of hummingbirds at a feeder. So this is just kind of backyard animal behavior. So you have one of those little feeders, and you have these nice little nectar pots, and of course there's usually a bully, and they might not even be in the same species. So this could be an example of intersexual territorial as well. And here you have somebody comes in and starts to sip, and then the big bully's like, boom! And they're so fast, they're not really going to cause damage to each other, but the message is being sent. Hey, this is my place. I've claimed this. This is my feeder, and in my feeder, here's the rules. You can get a tiny sip, but don't stay there too long, or I'll have to whoop your ass. And so we see that happening with hummingbirds. It's so funny. I mean, I don't have any kind of video clip to throw in here, but I remember my first time of being really, really excited about these strategic displays between animals would be these little yellow-headed jawfish that make these little burrows, and all day long these are used to attract mates, and so this is a mating territory. So I guess we went back to our original category of territory, and we thought of a male defended territory. Here's a hole on the floor of the ocean, and then there's various sizes of pebbles, and these guys will kind of carefully venture out of their nest. So if you're watching them, you know, here's the surface, so you can't see him, and all of a sudden he'll pop his head out. And you kind of look around, and then you go a little further, and if he doesn't see the guy in the territory over there, he'll completely swim out, and then you gotta get these kind of eel-like little bodies. They're not major swimmers, and he'll go and he'll grab a pebble from no man's land in between the territory, or possibly even grab a pebble that lines the opening to his competitor, the neighbor, and then scurry back and bring that thing and carefully put it around his nest. So they are making ornaments to identify their qualities, signaling to the female that, hey, this is the place you want to be. I am the best guy. Look at my pebbles. Look how beautiful that they are. I mean, we are so close to looking at territoriality as it relates to attracting mates that it's exciting. I mean, we got 2 more weeks left, and next week we're going to be talking about birds that do crazy, crazy things. The most famous crazy birds in terms of making attractive nests to attract females is the bowerbird. And I'll show you some bowerbird footage, you know, where these guys are just completely constructing elaborate structures and maintaining little piles of beautiful objects, collected objects from around. And so similar to the yellow-headed jawfish. But I guess the whole point here, though, is getting back to this whole thing. Somewhere in the mix here is a research holding potential that's demonstrated by many different species, and that is, you don't really want to mess with me. I'm the best one. So, having said that, let's look at another example. Another example of great, cool stuff in territoriality is going to be some evolutionary adaptations. So more on this line. So more evolutionary. Geez, let's get this U done. Evolutionary adaptations in the arena of territoriality. So what we want to look at here now is something called the deer enemy effect hypothesis. So this is yet another social behavior hypothesis. I'm going to set the stage here in a minute. I guess what I want to say first in defining this is over time, and therefore increasing familiarity with your neighbor, less time will be devoted to territorial disputes. Okay, I probably need to color this a little bit. I don't think I got quite enough in our definition here. Just think of experiences that you may have had. You know, if you've moved into an apartment complex, maybe you're the long-term resident and it's all cool and you've got like a really good neighbor to your left, a really good neighbor to your right, a really good neighbor across the hall. That's how it is for me. So right now, at this present time, got a great neighbor across the alley, got great neighbors over there. They're hippies that grow marijuana. And then a great neighbor over here who's actually former Denver PD. For a while, he was active Denver PD, and they were growing marijuana, and that was pre-legalization. Wow. But still, as far as I'm concerned, I'm not fighting with him, I'm not fighting with him, I'm not fighting with him because they're great neighbors. Of course, if somebody else moves in, then you actually take notice. And it's like, whoa, okay, who are you? What do you like? And, you can see kind of a visceral response by us, a highly social animal, to kind of be on guard for the beginning of a relationship. So, in the real world, out there with animals that defend territories, we see the same thing happening. And basically what we see in terms of the fights that are held between territory holders is that if they are long-established neighbors, they kind of don't mess with each other very much. I mean, if the neighbor kind of wanders into your territory, yeah, you're going to give them the message. I'm going to scurry over there and chase you, but I'm not going to go very far. Maybe a few steps is all it takes to get the message out. If that's a new intruder, you're going all the way, ready to throw blows if necessary. So we have to kind of bring this into some of the other social behavior concepts, all the way back to proximate. First off, recognition. Recognizing your own species is very, very important. Other things in the signaling have to do with seasonal changes. So suppose it's mating season and your colors change. This very often happens in males and in territorial species. So your colors change. You're showing I'm a great mate. Another form of signaling to your conspecifics and especially potential mates, but also signaling to willingness to win a fight. So that's all this stuff just blends together beautifully, and at its very basis, a signal like this is extraordinary. Animals that are out in nature have never seen themselves. So think about this for a minute. We see ourselves every day, although it's an inverted image. You guys are familiar in looking in mirrors. You're familiar with an inverted image, like a flipped image on the horizontal axis, right? I have to look at these videos that I'm making all the time, and so I'm seeing an image that's not really good to me because I'm not used to looking at myself as you see me. Now you think about this in an animal world where you find an animal all dressed up for mating colors, territory, guard on, and then you put a mirror in front of this animal who's never seen himself before, and he's like, oh, God! He goes major to town, major big fight with that animal. That's, of course, just a mirror. So there are lovely systems to study these kinds of behaviors, and in particular, lizards. There's some good examples in the lizards. So one of the classic examples for the deer enemy effect is actually with data, is an African lizard called broadleys. So here's an example of deer enemy effect. Broadleys, flat lizard, and I think you can find lots of data on here, but here's basically the deal. This is the result of some very intensive studies. The result of broadleys, flat-headed lizard, this is an African lizard, is that it will chase, so the male, I'm just going to change this, males will chase. So these are male territory holders. They're all brightly colored, of course. I mean, they're pumped up for mating. So males will chase their neighbors 1/5 the distance of unfamiliar intruders. So as I mentioned, in this African lizard, you know your neighbors. Now we're talking about social recognition at the individual level. Hey, dude, I know you. You know, you're, I don't know, probably doesn't have a name, but you're that one, and I know you. You're that one, and I know you. You're that one, and I know you. Pointing at different territories that I share a boundary with. If you kind of make a mistake and get into my territory a little bit, I'm just going to kind of flex up a little bit and sprint a couple of steps and say, dude, get back out of the territory. Everything is cool. But if you, as the scientist, take one of those lizards of familiarity, you know, regular neighbors out, and replace it with an unfamiliar intruder, and that unfamiliar intruder starts to kind of test the boundaries, it is throwdown time. You know, it's whoop-ass time. So it's run and fight 1/5 of the distance for familiarity compared to a full-on, basically, attack. Now, remember, another example that I showed you was pica, and this is kind of a modification of a deer-enemy effect. I just wanted to remind you that a male and a female will exhibit less intensive kinds of territorial dispute, aggression, than a male and a male. So that's an interesting thing. That's just a little sideline. I keep wanting to bring up pica because they're so cool, and we've been able to see them in several different ways. Okay, so that's the deer-enemy effect hypothesis. More on the deer-enemy effect hypothesis coming. Okay, so let's take a look at some other experiments. This is deer-enemy, and we don't look at some experiments. One of the classic types of experiments would be called, as I just mentioned with the lizard, was a replacement experiment. So we already talked briefly about the replacement experiment, and the one that was put in, what's unfamiliar, got chased five times more intensively as the familiar neighbors. Well, let's take a look at some of our animals in the same light. So, example number 1 here, red-winged blackbirds. Here's a little sideline. We were supposed to be looking at red-winged blackbirds this week in lab. We were supposed to actually be meeting at site, getting out all sorts of optical gear, spotting scopes, telephoto lenses and cameras, binoculars, and we're going to take a look at these territories male red-winged blackbirds hold. They exhibit a mating system where the male has a territory, one earlier this spring, and so along any kind of marsh, cattail marsh is the classic red-winged blackbird area, but these marshlands with emergent grass-like vegetation, and then there'll be multiple male territories around the periphery of this little body of water, and then within that they are polygynous. We've encountered that word before, polygyny, so I guess we want to do this polygyny. And so these males will defend a territory, and within that territory, several females will build nests attached to these cattails, these small little nests. So that's how it works. Now, these guys have won the territory. They defend the territory quite well. There's lots of vocalizations. If you look at the kind of social behavior kind of video showcase, you'll see a little bit of that and hear a little bit of that. And by the way, you know, the city's about ready to open up. Go take a look. Go take a look at some of this behavior when you can. You know, a lot of these places are still closed, but the animals are there. They're waiting for you. So pretty soon you can actually go out and kind of put some of this stuff right into the middle of your brain with real concrete examples. So red-winged blackbirds, polygyny, and here's a replacement experiment. So remove the male, and here's what happens. You remove the male from the territory, and basically, here's what will happen. You control the amount of time that you keep that male away from his territory. So basically, remove the male and basically hold the male, and then when you release the male at different times to go back, here's what's going to happen. As time increases, he will fail to regain. So short time, he regains. And then as time increases, long time away from the territory, his chances of regaining diminish. Diminishing chances to regain. He might be the greatest male ever, but as time goes on, he's going to lose his ability to regain that. So that's a classic example too. Another example is another example here is one with a tarantula hawk. And the tarantula hawk is actually not a bird. This is a massive, massive wasp that actually, an aggressive predator. So this is a wasp. Very beautiful animal. They're so big that they capture large spiders, including tarantulas. So that's an impressive animal. And the tarantula hawk, if you they exhibit a system of territoriality on shrubs. So the males, the top male, literally is at the upper position in a shrub. This is a very short-term game here on a shrub. So for mating, if you're on the top of the shrub, you're the one that actually is going to get most of the action. That's the position to hold. And basically, if you remove, here's how it works. A few minutes before re-release, he regains it, no fight. So the male regains, you let him go, he gets to the top position, regains it with no fight. And then the other one is that if you hold 1 hour, remove that guy, remove the male, and 1 hour later, there's basically going to be, we call it a battle royale. Battle royale ensues. So there's pretty short-term kind of memory with regards to, hey, you're the dominant male, but an hour later, just another guy, and we're going to fight. So that's an interesting thing too. So we have temporal aspect to this whole construct. Very, very cool stuff. Everything that we've said here, we have the deer enemy effect hypothesis. That one holds true for those lizards. So starting with, these different examples of lizards, these examples I gave you, the red-winged blackbird, the tarantula hawk, all of these things and more are kind of indicating to us that the original holding that from an optimality perspective, it's better to hold your territory than to give it up. So the idea here is that the payoff here, now we're getting game, the payoff here is that the original holding, there's a bigger payoff for the original holder to keep the territory. So the original territory holder has a bigger payoff than the intruder winning the territory. Why? This is going to take a hell of a lot of energy to wage this battle and win the territory, as we saw. And so this guy's got more to lose than this guy has to gain because of the price of the gain. So therefore we call this the payoff. Altogether, we call this the payoff asymmetry hypothesis, which favors the original holder of a territory to keep the territory. The payoff asymmetry hypothesis. Okay, another hypothesis for us, the payoff asymmetry hypothesis. Very, very cool. The last thing that I want to bring to your attention for this nice little lecture here is honest signaling. So an adaptationist idea, and this is therefore evolutionary. So we're going to talk about honest signals. Honest signals. An honest signal is going to be defined as a morphology. By the way, a lot of those morphologies are size and color, plumage, all of that stuff. Whoa. So a morphology and or a behavioral pattern. Behavioral pattern. I'll call it a behavioral pattern, and or a physiology, and of course physiology could be manifest in semiochemicals that you're giving off, pheromones. Like I smell like somebody could whoop your ass is basically the idea there. So morphology, behavioral, and physiology, and or physiology that reflect or project, maybe I should say, to an opponent, that project an individual's, the ability of an individual to win a contest. And that's an honest signal. There's lots of great systems that have been looked at through this lens of honest signals. There's a lot of great behavioral patterns. Sometimes vocalizations are really the big deal, but also bright colors. I mean, super bright seasonal red colors. I'm thinking of a stickleback fish. There's all these different things, morphologies or behavioral patterns, physiology, or some combination of all of them that indicate that I'm going to win and you don't want to mess with me. Now, of course, if that honest signal prevents expenditure of energy, just because, hey, I'm not even messing with that. I'm not spending any energy in that at all. Wow, how beautiful is that? Because when we look at optimality concept, we are looking at this is how much you spend, this is how much you gain, and we want to optimize, to maximize the gain to the benefit to the cost. So we have the biggest amount of profit. That's what life is. And so many of these things are actually centered around that fundamental concept that goes way back to, finances, how to make money. Let's spend this, let's get this. Let's spend this, let's get this. Okay, so there we have it. Fantastic kind of synthesis of social behavior into one of the most provocative and exciting areas, and that has to do with territoriality and disputes. So that is what I have now. We're going to now move into the wonderful world of sexual behavior, which of course is also major social behavior kind of concept. Always. All these animals have to mate. And we're breaking into this. In breaking into this, we need to go way back, for some of you at least, to considering the very power of sexual reproduction. So to do that, I'm going to plug in a lecture on where the real power of sex lives, and that lives in gonads. Meiotic gamete production is huge in terms of generating genetic diversity. Therefore, it really defines the power of sex. Look at the different Homo sapiens that you see. We're all different. I mean, just think about everything. Just pick a structure, and look at morphology. Think of noses for a while. Wow, how many different shapes of noses are out there? Think of, pick anything. Hair. Of course, lack of it, but hair color, hair thickness, hair curliness, all of these different things are just basically found in the soup of the process of meiosis that makes gametes, and then ultimately the two gametes that come together to make the sexual product of that reproductive act. That's what drives the show here, and we need to understand it. We need to go back and refresh ourselves before we can truly understand. Once we understand the power of sex, then we can truly understand all of these mating systems and interpret these mating systems from the perspective of each sex and the system and how the animal does what it does. It's an exciting time. We finished this whole class with basically nothing but sexual behavior. Exciting times. I'll see you next time.